I want you to picture something for me. You're 73 years old, sitting at your own kitchen table, the table you paid for, in the house you spent 30 years paying off, and your wife of 44 years slides a glossy folder across the wood like she's closing a business deal. On the cover there's a photo of a smiling old man in a cardigan playing checkers, and above his head, in soft gold letters, it says, Whispering Pines Assisted Living Community. And your wife, the woman you married in 1980, the woman you raised 2 kids with, looks you dead in the eye and says, Walter, I've already spoken to them. They have an opening in March. She wasn't asking me. She was informing me. I'm Walter. I'm 73 years old, and 14 months ago, my wife decided that the next chapter of my life would take place in a facility 20 minutes from our house in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I would be safe and supervised and out of the way. So I'm going to tell you what I did instead. I took my half of the savings, I packed 2 suitcases, and I bought a one-way ticket to the Philippines. I moved to Dumaguete, a small city on an island most Americans have never heard of, alone, at 73, with my wife telling everyone at church that I'd had some kind of breakdown. And I want to be honest with you right up front, because this story isn't as simple as the ones you usually hear. Nobody died. Nobody cheated. This is a story about something quieter and, in some ways, harder to explain. It's about what happens when the person who's supposed to know you best stops seeing you at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Diane and I got married in 1980. I was 27, working at a wire and cable plant on the east side of Fort Wayne. She was 24, doing bookkeeping for a furniture store. We did everything the way you were supposed to do it. Bought a starter house, then a bigger house. Had 2 kids, Susan and David. I worked at that plant for 38 years. Ended up a shift supervisor. Diane kept the books for half the small businesses in our part of town. We went to the same church for 4 decades. We took one big vacation a year, usually Florida, once to the Grand Canyon. It was a good life. I want to be clear about that. For a long time, it was a good life. The trouble didn't start with a bang. It started with a fall. 3 years ago, I slipped on ice getting the mail. Cracked 2 ribs. Bruised my hip. Nothing that didn't heal. But something changed in Diane after that. It was like a switch flipped. Suddenly I wasn't Walter anymore. I was a liability. She started narrating my life back to me in warnings. Don't take the stairs so fast. Don't get on that ladder. Don't drive after dark. You shouldn't be shoveling. You shouldn't be grilling. You'll forget the propane. Walter, did you take your pills? Walter, why is the stove on? The stove was on because I was cooking, which I had done, competently, for 50 years. Then she took the ladder to Goodwill without telling me. Then she started scheduling my doctor's appointments without asking, and going into the exam room with me, and answering the doctor's questions before I could open my mouth. He sleeps too much. He's unsteady. Tell him he can't drive at night. And I'd sit there on that crinkly paper like a child, while 2 people discussed me in the third person. I want to be fair to her, because this story doesn't work if I make Diane a monster, and she isn't one. Her own father declined hard at the end. Falls, hospitals, a broken hip that started a 2-year slide she had to manage almost alone. She watched that happen to a man she loved, and I think she promised herself she'd get ahead of it next time. I understand that. I really do. But understanding something doesn't always make it easier to live with. Because here's what her fear turned into, day by day. A house where I wasn't allowed to do anything. She did the driving. She did the finances, which had always been hers. Fine. But now she wouldn't even show me the statements. She hovered when I walked down the basement stairs. When my buddy Gene asked me to help him rebuild the deck on his lake cottage, something I'd have loved, something I was fully capable of, Diane called Gene's wife and got it called off. I found out later. From Gene. You want to talk about humiliation? I started to shrink. That's the only way I can describe it. I'd been a man who ran a shift of 40 people. I could rewire a garage, fillet a walleye, drive to Chicago without a map. And within 2 years I'd become a man who sat in a recliner while his wife told visitors, right in front of him, "We have to keep an eye on him." I'd smile when she said it. That's the part that shames me now. I smiled. The pamphlets came out on a Tuesday in October. Whispering Pines. Then a second one, Maple Crest. Susan drove up from Indianapolis for the conversation, so I knew it had been planned. They sat me at my own kitchen table, and Diane explained, calmly, reasonably, that the house was too much, that she couldn't be responsible for me around the clock, that Whispering Pines had a lovely independent living wing, that she'd stay in the house for now, and I'd be 20 minutes away, and she'd visit all the time. Let me say that plainly so you don't miss it. The plan was not for us to downsize together. The plan was for me to go and for her to stay. She'd already spoken to them. She'd already toured it. Susan had already looked over the contract. She's an accountant. She'd checked the fee schedule. They had it all figured out. Everything except one small detail. Nobody had asked me. I didn't blow up. I wish I could tell you I pounded the table, but I didn't. I just said, "I'm not going." And Diane did the thing she'd learned to do. She looked at Susan, sighed, and said, "See? This is what I deal with." Like my no was a symptom. That night I lay in bed next to a woman I'd slept beside for 44 years, and I felt further from her than I'd ever felt from anyone in my life. And I asked myself a question I hadn't let myself ask in a long time. When was the last time I felt like a man instead of a problem? I couldn't remember. That scared me more than any fall ever could. Now, I need to be clear about something. I didn't wake up the next morning and book a flight to Manila. This wasn't some spite-fueled tantrum. It took months, and it started like these things do, in the strangest way. There was a fellow at our church, Arturo, a Filipino man in his 60s who'd been in Fort Wayne since the 80s, worked maintenance at the hospital. We'd been friendly for years, nodding and coffee friendly. That November, at the men's breakfast, somebody asked about his trip home. He'd just spent a month in the Philippines, and Arturo pulled out his phone. Pictures of his brother's place in Dumaguete. A porch, the ocean 2 blocks away, 70 people at a birthday party. And he said something I never forgot. He said, "In the Philippines, an old man is not a burden. An old man is a treasure. My father is 91, and he has never eaten a meal alone. Never eaten a meal alone." I chewed on that sentence for a week. And then I got curious, quietly, privately curious. I'd take my laptop to the library, because at home Diane could see the screen, and I read. Cost of living. The Serve Retirement Visa. Expat forums. YouTube videos of American retirees in Cebu, in Davao, in this little university town called Dumaguete that everyone kept calling the City of Gentle People. Population around 130,000. Silliman University, right in the middle of town. A boulevard along the sea where people walk every evening. Hospitals. An airport. Rent for a decent one-bedroom, $250 to $350 a month. I did the math a dozen times. My pension and Social Security came to about $2,900 a month. In Fort Wayne, splitting our costs, I was comfortable. In Dumaguete, that was more than 3 times what many local families lived on. And Whispering Pines, by the way, the place they'd picked out for me, $4,300 a month for the privilege of being warehoused. I kept reading for 4 months. I joined a Facebook group for expats in Dumaguete under a profile with no photo. I asked questions. What's the healthcare honestly like? What do you wish you'd known? Is it safe for a single older man? And the answers were all over the map. Some people had gone home after a year, but the ones who'd stayed 5, 10, 15 years kept saying versions of the same thing. It's not perfect, but I'd rather have imperfect and alive than perfect and shelved. In February, I told Diane I was going to visit Jean's brother in Arizona for 2 weeks. That was a lie, and I'm not proud of it. But I'll tell you exactly why I did it. Because if I'd told her the truth, there would have been a family meeting, and phone calls to Susan, and maybe a call to our doctor, and my 2 weeks would have become evidence. Evidence that Walter was confused. Evidence for the file. I flew Detroit to Tokyo to Manila, then a short hop down to Dumaguete on a little Airbus that came in low over water, so blue it didn't look real. I walked out of that one-room airport into heat like a warm towel, and a tricycle driver, that's a motorcycle with a sidecar, they're everywhere, grinned at me and said, "Where you go, sir?" And I realized I was smiling for no reason. When was the last time that happened? I'd booked a small pension house near Rizal Boulevard for about $22 a night. And that first evening, I did what everyone in Dumaguete does. I walked the boulevard. It runs along the sea, big old acacia trees, tempura stalls, students from Silliman laughing in groups, old men playing chess on benches, families eating balut and grilled corn. And here's what got me. People talked to me, not hustling me, talking. A man about my age sitting on the seawall asked where I was from, and when I said Indiana, he laughed and said his cousin was a nurse in Chicago. Everybody's cousin is a nurse in Chicago. And we sat there for an hour while the sun went down behind the boats. His name was Nestor, retired schoolteacher. He shook my hand when I left and said, "You come back tomorrow. I am always here." I went back tomorrow. He was there. 2 weeks. I looked at apartments in Piapi and Bantayan, walked through Silliman Medical Center and asked about costs. A consultation ran about 500 pesos, $9. Ate at carinderias where I pointed at pots and paid $1.50 for a meal. Took a day trip to the Twin Lakes up in the mountains. Drank kinilaw, that's their version of ceviche, at a table of strangers who refused to let me pay. And one evening, sitting on the seawall with a mango shake watching kids cannonball off the pier, I felt something in my chest unlock, and I realized what it was. Nobody here was watching me for symptoms. Nobody was waiting for me to fail. I wasn't a fall risk. I was just Walter. I flew home, and I knew. What happened next was the hardest 4 months of my life. And I'm going to tell it straight, because I promised you honest. I told Diane the truth. All of it. The lie about Arizona, the trip, what I'd found, and what I wanted. And I want you to know, I didn't lead with leaving. I led with an invitation. I sat her down and I said, "Come with me. Come see it. 6 months, we rent the house out, and if you hate it, we come home, and I'll never mention it again." I meant every word. She looked at me like I'd suggested we move to the moon. Then came the anger, and then something colder than anger. She said, "You are 73 years old, and you're talking like a teenager. This is exactly the kind of thinking I've been worried about." And she picked up the phone and called Susan, and I listened to my wife tell my daughter that Dad had done something behind their backs, and she didn't know who I was anymore. The next weeks were meetings and phone calls, and one genuinely awful afternoon when Susan asked me, gently, with love in her voice, whether I'd be willing to sit for a cognitive evaluation. To reassure everyone. I did it, by the way. Aced it. The doctor, to his credit, looked at Diane and said, "Cognitively, your husband is fine. This appears to be a disagreement, not a diagnosis." I could have kissed the man. But it didn't matter. Diane's position never moved. She was not going to the Philippines, which was her right, and I was not going either, which was not. Whispering Pines came up again. In March, remember. The opening was in March. My son David, who'd stayed quiet through most of it, called me one night from Denver. He said, "Dad, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I've watched Mom talk over you for 3 years, and honestly, I'd want to run too." Then he was quiet a second and said, "Just don't disappear on us." I promised him I wouldn't. Diane and I had 44 years, and I won't pretend the ending was clean. We separated. The lawyers kept it civil. Indiana splits things down the middle. She kept the house. I took my share of the retirement savings. At our age, they call it gray divorce. And there's more of it than you'd think. The day I signed the papers, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and cried like I hadn't since my mother's funeral. You can be certain about a decision and still grieve it. Nobody tells you that. I'm telling you. The women at church stopped meeting my eyes. The story going around was that Walter had abandoned Diane, had some kind of episode, was being taken advantage of by someone overseas. Pick your version. Only Gene came by the week I left. He helped me haul boxes to Goodwill, and when we were done, he shook my hand and said, "I think you're crazy." And I think you're right. That's a real friend. 2 suitcases and a backpack. That's what 73 years came down to. And a 20-hour trip to think about my daughter's face when she hugged me at the airport and whispered, "I'm still not okay with this, Dad." And me whispering back, "I know. Come see me anyway." I landed in Dumaguete in June, at the start of the rainy season, and Nestor, the school teacher from the seawall we'd kept in touch, was standing outside that little airport with a golf umbrella and a sign that said Walter, my American friend. 73 years old, and I nearly wept at baggage claim. I rented a small 1-bedroom in Bantayan, 2nd floor, tile floors, a little balcony where I can see a slice of the sea between 2 rooftops. 14,000 pesos a month, about $250, and my landlady, Mrs. Villanueva, a widow in her 60s who lives downstairs, included water and whatever vegetables are too many from the garden, which, it turns out, is a lot of vegetables. I'm not going to pretend the first months were a postcard. They weren't. The rain in June comes down like the sky has a grudge. The brownouts kill your fan at 2 a.m., and you lie there sweating and thinking, what have I done? I got lost. I got lonely. I missed my kids so bad some nights it was a physical ache. I missed, and this is the strange one, I missed Diane. Not the last 3 years of Diane. The Diane from before. You spend 44 years with someone, your hands remember reaching for them. There were nights I sat on that balcony and asked the dark whether a man my age had any business starting over. But then morning would come, and morning in Dumaguete is a hard place to stay sad. Mrs. Villanueva knocking with a plate of fresh lumpia because she made too much, which I'm convinced is the national excuse for kindness. The bakery on the corner where the girls started setting aside 2 pan de sal for me before I even reached the counter. "Good morning, Sir Walter, still hot." Nestor and his chess crew on the boulevard, who taught me that losing to a 78-year-old retired customs officer named Bong is not embarrassing. It's Tuesday. The tricycle drivers who know me now and quote me the local price, not the tourist price, without my asking. About 4 months in, I had my scare. Woke up dizzy, heart doing a strange flutter. 73, alone, 8,000 miles from home. This was the exact scenario, word for word, that Diane had wielded for years. I got myself to Silliman Medical Center. They took me straight back. EKG, blood work, a cardiologist named Dr. Uy, who spent 40 minutes with me. 40 minutes. When's the last time an American doctor gave you 40 minutes? And the verdict was atrial fibrillation, mild, manageable, medication and monitoring. The whole workup cost me about 6,500 pesos. That's around $115. And when Mrs. Villanueva found out, word travels. She sent her grandson up every evening for a week to check if Sir Walter needs anything. I was never once alone in it. I called Susan that night and told her everything. The symptoms, the hospital, the cost, the cardiologist, the grandson. She was quiet a long time and then she said, "Dad, if that had happened at Whispering Pines, they'd have called an ambulance and billed you $4,000. First crack in the wall. She came at Christmas. My accountant daughter arrived with a notebook full of questions and left 10 days later with a sunburn and a promise to come back. But the moment that broke her wasn't the hospital tour or the rent math. It was Nestor's granddaughter's birthday party, where 60 people I mostly didn't know insisted her father, that's me, sit at the head table, and an old auntie kept refilling my plate and telling Susan, "Your papa is very kind. He teaches the children English at the barangay hall on Thursdays." Susan looked at me and said, "You teach kids now?" I shrugged and said somebody had to explain the difference between chicken and kitchen. On her last night, on my little balcony, she said, "I came here to check on you. Nobody here thinks you need checking on." And then, quieter, "You're not who Mom said you'd become. You're who you used to be." I've replayed that sentence 100 times. David visited in spring with his wife. He's talking about a return trip already. He wants to climb the mountain behind the Twin Lakes. I told him I'd wait at the bottom with a beer. I know my limits. That's the thing nobody back home believed. I always knew my limits. I just wanted to be the one who set them. And Diane. We talk, once a month or so. It's careful, but it's not cruel. Last time, near the end of the call, she said, "You sound good, Walter." Not happy about it exactly. But she said it. 44 years earns you the truth. And the truth is, I hope she finds what I found, in whatever form she can love. I didn't leave to punish her. I left because there was a version of me that was going to die in a recliner with a smile on his face, and I couldn't let him. It's been 14 months. I'm on the boulevard most evenings. I lose to bong most Tuesdays. I teach the kids on Thursdays, and a little girl named Precious recently informed me that my Visayan accent is very funny, sir, but okay. My heart's behaving. My rent's paid through next year, and some mornings I stand on that balcony with my coffee, looking at my little slice of sea, and I think about a glossy folder sliding across a kitchen table in Fort Wayne. They have an opening in March. I'm sure they filled it. It just wasn't with me. Because here's what I learned, and if you take nothing else from this, take this. Being kept safe is not the same as being kept alive. And love that stops asking what you want isn't love anymore. It's management. I'm 73 years old, and I refuse to be managed. I'd rather be Walter, the funny accented American on the boulevard, than a photograph in a cardigan on somebody's brochure. I'm not done yet, not even close. Before we wrap up here, I want to mention something that might help if any of this hit close to home. There's a book I came across during my research called The Honest Move. It lays out the real costs, compares the cities, walks through the visa process and the healthcare system, and flags the traps I wish somebody had flagged for me. I didn't write it, and I'm not selling you anything. But if you're seriously thinking about a move like this, it's the unfiltered version, and there's a link in the description if you want to look. And if you got something out of this story, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one, from people who decided their last chapter was going to be their best one. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.